The call came in on a Tuesday at 4:32 in the afternoon, late October. The sun already sliding behind the Blue Ridge, so the hollows of Shenandoah darkened early. Ranger Aislinn Keats was parked at mile marker 47 of Skyline Drive, just north of the Rapidan turnoff, a paper cup of station coffee cooling in the cup holder, and her radio tuned to the quiet channel they used for backcountry check-ins. The speaker breathed. Static arranged itself into a voice that did not sound like any of her crew. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Aislinn turned the volume wheel a notch. Out the windshield, the ridge was drawn in crosshatch, oaks and hickories going copper, the sky a pale thing you could scratch with your nail. The voice came again, precise, as if it were reading off a card. Fox Hollow Base to any unit on the east slope. Child missing. Male, age 8. Name Harlan Whitcomb. Last seen near the Old Stone Spring House above Corbin Run. Weather degenerating. Hurricane Hazel expected to push in, winds rising. Request all available. Time is 16:30, October 14, 1954. The radio clicked off into snow. Then, faintly, the same message, identical down to the breath before the name. Aislinn stared at the handset. Their base was called Piney River Dispatch. Their tower names were Pinnacles and Hazeltop and Big Meadows. No one in the park had used Fox Hollow for decades. Her training cracked its knuckles. She keyed the mic. Piney River to unknown unit. Say again. Who is calling Fox Hollow Base? Silence laid itself over the car like a thin blanket. Beyond the glass, a crow moved from one bear snag to another as if demonstrating a diagram. The wind was a steady push from the southeast. Hazel. The word gave the hairs on Aislinn's arms ideas. She stepped out and let the door swing shut. The air had that warm edge you get before a storm that started somewhere else. Leaves chased each other along the asphalt, then lay down. In the trunk lay her day pack, a spare radio, and a copy of a paper map creased along the places everyone folds them. She slung the pack, checked battery levels, turned the spare to scan. The main radio kept its sulk. The spare found chatter from Big Meadows about a flat tire near Lewis Mountain, then returned to quiet. The old voice did not return. Aislinn keyed in to dispatch. Piney, Keats at 47. I caught a transmission, sounds like a vintage call. Reference to Fox Hollow, child missing near Corbin Run, date October 14, 1954. Could someone check the archive on that, see if we have a historical incident report? The dispatcher was a steady woman named Karen, who did not make noises she did not need. Copy, Aislinn. Stand by. Aislinn leaned on the hood and looked east, where the hills tumbled like knuckles, all green and copper and shadow. She had worked Shenandoah 5 seasons. She knew the way the ridges spoke when you asked them right. She also knew radios lie sometimes, bouncing off ducts of temperature and skipping across layers of ionized air like stones. She had heard voices from fire towers that had been torn down before she was born, and a farmer yelling to his brother on a frequency no longer assigned to anyone. She had never heard a date pinned to a hurricane whose name lived in the county's memory like a scar. Karen came back. We have a typewritten Keats, Incident 1954-H, filed at Piney River. Hurricane Hazel, multiple rock slides, a missing person in the Corbin area, that name you gave. It is a cold file. It does not say recovered. I repeat, not recovered. No remains located. Not closed. Aislinn pressed the radio to her shoulder until the plastic complained. Copy. Can you send scans to my phone? I'm heading down to the Corbin Run access. If anyone else is close enough to meet, let them know. There was a pause, a little breath that was not static. Karen's voice softened a shade, the way people do when the past finds a way to ask for your time. Sending now. Watch your footing, the trails are a mess of marbles with the leaves down. Want Dupre from Hazeltop on, stand by. Affirmative. Aislinn slung the pack across her back and looked once more at the ridgeline. A truck from Fleet rumbled past, the driver lifting 2 fingers off the wheel in that rural benediction. Clouds had started as a rumor and were now themselves. The Corbin Run access was a gravel pull-off hidden beneath tulip poplars that had learned to whisper. Aislinn eased the truck in sideways and cut the engine. She took the trail with her boots, making small promises to each rock. The stream voiced itself down the hollow knit of last week's rain and this afternoon's melt of a single stubborn snowpatch in a shadow under a ledge. The map told the story of the lower springhouse, a square of stones where water had been convinced to behave. Above it, a ledge with a scatter of quartz chips, the leftovers of older hands doing older work. Aislinn kept an ear on her radio and the other on the creek. She caught the place where a trail forgets itself and becomes deer. She found the old springhouse, its stones asking to be counted. She touched the edge of the low wall with the kind of gentleness reserved for quilts and engines. She did not say the boy's name. The afternoon pulled its shoulders in. The radio breathed again. Same cadence, same careful voice. Fox Hollow base to any unit on the east slope. Child missing. Harlan Whitcomb. Last seen near Stone Spring House above Corbin Run. Weather degenerating. Request all available. Time is 16:30. October 14, 1954. Aislinn shivered in the warm air. Her eyes went to the spring house and its square of shadow. She moved the beam of her headlamp across the stones, not because she expected to see anything, but because light can sometimes rewrite a sentence the land is trying to say. The beam found a length of rust, half buried in the moss, along the back of the foundation, thin as a butter knife, with a clip and a circle at one end. She crouched. A whistle. Army surplus, by the look of it. She teased it free, the moss unwilling to let it go. The metal had pitted and softened into a river-colored thing. She wiped it once against her sleeve, then regretted the act. Her radio clicked and made a sound she had not heard in years, a squelch from another era. Karen came back on. Keats. Dupre is on the way from Hazeltop Tower, 20 minutes if the drive is kind. Archives show the boy was last seen by his father near the spring house, yes. The father left him to fetch his jacket from the car. Weather shifted, heavy gust pushed through, child gone when he returned. Tracks lost near the ledge above the run. 2 days of cruise, then Hazel brought the flood and they stood them down. The file has letters from the mother, 2 years after, asking if anyone found anything she could hold. Answer stamped no. Aislinn looked at the whistle in her hand, then at the spring that fed the run. The water wore a sheen of leaves thin enough to count. She keyed the mic. Found a whistle near the spring house. Will bag it. Doubt it has any forensic value after 6 decades, but a photograph might matter to someone. As she spoke, a figure eased out of the trees upstream. A man in the brown and green of a ranger uniform, but the cut of it was wrong in a way you can feel even if you do not have the words. The shirt had pockets like ideas, the hat sat stiff as a rule book, he carried a strap radio that looked like a lunch pail with an antenna. He exhaled, then stopped when he saw her. "Ma'am," he said. There was a formality in the syllables, like church on a day that hurt. "We're sweeping the east slope." The boy's father said he was right here. He pointed at the stones, as if pointing could anchor the earth. Aislinn stood very still. The man's face had the smoothness of someone who had not yet had reason to learn what whiskey was for. His name tag said M. Elwood. His shoulder patch bore an American shield with a tree she did not recognize. He glanced down at her radio and then at the whistle in her hand. "You with us?" he asked. "You with Fox Hollow?" Aislinn's throat did the dry swallow of a person whose mind is faster than her words. "Yes," she said, because yes was easier than telling a man with a lunch pail radio about the word digital. "I heard your call." "Where are your lines?" "At the ridge," he said, puzzled by the question. "We got men cutting sign along the deer trails. We got women at base keeping track of names. The disaster man out of Charlottesville told us Hazel will give us until dawn and then gone." He looked past her to the ledge, his jaw a small square against the warm air. "Mother is at the church in Syria, not the far one, the one with the bell rope that sticks. She keeps asking if he had a jacket. She wants the question to be a fact." A gust moved through the trees on some business of its own. Aislinn felt the air change around the bones of the rocks. The man looked at her again, and the little muscle at the corner of his mouth twitched. "Your radio," he said. "You get this out to anyone else." "Yes." "We have a tower at Hazeltop. They know. Someone is coming." "Good," he said softly. Then he put 2 fingers to his brow. an old salute done halfway because distance is difficult to respect when the ground is asking for more of you. He stepped past her, boots exact on the damp leaves, and moved toward the ledge, listening with his face. He put a hand out as if to feel a draft. His outline lightened as if the warm air had decided he belonged to it. The forest made the sound of a coat hem brushed along a pew. He was gone. Aislinn stood, her hands empty now that the whistle had weight inside a bag. She did not call after him because naming a thing makes it pick a room and leave all the others. She climbed the slope above the spring house, careful, testing each foot. The ground showed her where it had let go before. The soil had slumped sometime between 1954 and now a scar that trees had tried to stitch. She scoped along the edge and thought about the father leaving for a jacket, a boy with a whistle and a spring that talks even when wind tells it not to. Dupre's SUV nosed into the pull-off as the last of the light left, and the storm made its speech. Jericho Dupre had shoulders like a doorframe and a way of stepping onto ground as if asking permission. He carried 2 headlamps and a calm that turned wind into a task rather than a threat. "You heard it too," he said, by way of greeting. "I did, twice. Then it came again down at the spring house. I found this." She held up the bag. The whistle swung on its string, dull as an old firmament. He took the bag and looked as if it could tell him how to think. He listened. The wind pushed down the hollow. The radio hissed, then thought better of it. He nodded at the ledge. "If it were mine to write," he said, "I would say, slip." The file says gusty before hazel. A child with a small sense of infinity walks the line twice to see if the sound changes along the water. It does. He steps where the deer stepped, and the hill remembers it owes the river a favor. Aislinn told him about the ranger with the lunch pail radio. Jericho had been in the park long enough to have a story for everything and to respect none of them fully. Fox Hollow was an unofficial name for the old maintenance yard near Syria in the 50s. He said, the way a person does when they are agreeing with the possibility of a ghost to be polite. There is a cinder pad there with the marks of 4 posts, like a tower. The radios would have been handsets the size of a Bible that could make clouds sound like news. People back then wrote reports thick with nouns. They did not trust adjectives unless a man had bled. He held the bag with the whistle for an extra breath. He set it in his crew pocket. They searched until rain made the ground decide to be a different kind of ground. In light from their headlamps, the trees stood at attention, counseling caution. They ran a short line grid above the ledge, more to be able to say they had used the dark well than because they expected the earth to give up a long-ago truth for free. At 9, the radios called them home before the lightning made the argument personal. Karen met Aislinn at the office with a printout. The file had been scanned, crooked, and the edges were black, where the copier had tried to keep history from fraying. The incident commander's name was printed in a firm hand, M. Elwood. A note in the margin had been added later in pencil. Mother moved to Luray in 67, father deceased, no closure letter sent. The pencil note was signed with a small initial A and a dot. Aislinn slept at the bunkhouse with the radio on her nightstand like a dog. She dreamed that paper flapped along a clothesline strung between trees, and she walked the line, reading every letter, her feet lined up on the rocks of the run, the paper turning to leaves as she read. At 3 in the morning, she woke to the noise a storm makes when it finally accepts its job. The world beyond the window went white, then black, then white again. She turned the volume down to half. She watched the rain write gloss on the sill. The radio stayed quiet. At 10, the day pulled itself together into rags. Aislinn drove down to Luray to a blue house where the porch had a swing, and the swing had 2 cushions that had learned how to be rain. She had a name from the file and a phone number that still worked, to her surprise. A woman in her 80s opened the door with the careful welcome reserved for officials who might be good news or could be kind even if they were not. "I am Aislinn Keats," she said, ranger with Shenandoah. "I am here because a storm pulled a thread and we saw where it ran." The woman corrected her posture and straightened the collar of her cardigan as if a story would take her picture. "My name is Tilda Whitcomb," she said. "We did not know how to leave him there, so we stayed." I have a loaf of banana bread that forgot the raisins on purpose if you are the kind of visitor who does not mind crumbs. Aislinn sat at a round table so clean it looked like a rule. The banana bread was honest, the tea was strong. Tilda put her hand on the tablecloth and kept it there as if the cloth would be steadier if it knew she was not going anywhere. She said the name Harlan like a stake you drive into ground so the tent knows where to stand. He whistled 3 notes, Tilda said. The tune the train plays when it comes into Luray, because his father used to take him to the crossing and they would wave at the men who stand like saints. 3 notes and then he would laugh because he was practiced at laughing. The wind took the notes and did not give them back. My husband ran to the car and the sky changed. They told him on the radio he had until morning. You can live your whole life in a sentence like that. Aislinn put the bagged whistle on the table. The string looped like a sleeping thing. Tilda did not reach for it. She looked at it as one looks at an old photograph that has learned how to move. I did not get a letter, she said, and smiled small to prove she was not accusing. I understand how papers behave. I was a clerk before my hands forgot to love the carbon paper. I suppose I wrote a letter in my head every day for 2 years. Then I stopped asking out loud. You cannot keep asking the same question without turning into a different person. The whistle sat, silent, older than most of the kitchen. Tilda looked out the window and the window looked back. A red cardinal landed on the feeder and told everyone, rudely, that it had arrived. Tilda laughed at the bird, and the laugh made her look like a photograph of herself. Aislinn asked about the ranger named Elwood. Tilda's eyes softened. Martin Elwood went to our church, she said. He was the kind of man who knocked on the door with his hat in both hands. He brought us a bag of oranges at Christmas and apologized as if the oranges had failed to be children. He wrote the report because that is what he could do, and he built a cinder block box for the tower that was not a tower, and then he got quiet like men do when they find out the world can keep a thing from them and they still have to go to work. Back in the truck, Aislinn let the radio hum. Big Meadows asked Pinnacles to send a set of cones to mile marker 62. A bear stared down a minivan with an intensity that made the parents breathe like swimmers. Life had resumed its insistence. She turned the truck toward the old maintenance yard near Syria, the one Jericho half remembered as a place with 4 posts and a name more rumor than rule. There was a cinder pad there for sure, now half invaded by chickweed and ambition. Someone had collected beer cans along the edge and arranged them by brand into a timeline. Aislinn walked the perimeter and crouched at a corner where the concrete had spalled enough to show a rebar smile. She brushed the dirt aside with one hand. A penny lay there. The year was 1954. She laughed, because a park and a story will sometimes give you too many symbols and you have to choose which to be corny about. The wind rose toward evening. The radio stayed in this decade, obedient and dull. Aislinn drove the ridge road, watching the color slide toward Bruce. Back at the office, Karen handed her a thin envelope with a stamped return address that made Aislinn's scalp feel like it had learned something. It was from an amateur radio club in Harrisonburg, a man who had heard the show Aislinn, sometimes called During Slow Nights, the one where listeners told stories of radios hearing the wrong things on purpose. We pick up oddities when the weather steeps the air, the man had written. Old distress calls, ham tests bounced off airplane wings, bombers from the 40s practicing. Once, a train dispatch from 1960 rolled through on a rain so thick you could chew it. There are names for this, and none of them explain it. The way I think of it is this. Time breathes shallow near storms. If a voice was loud enough once and the same air returns, you might hear a ghost that is not a ghost. Not dead, not alive, just not finished talking. That night, Aislinn drove down to Corbin Run one last time with a single job. She stood by the spring house and held the whistle. She did not put it to her lips because it belonged to a mouth that had done its work. She set it on the stone in the square of water smell and said a sentence Tilda had given her permission to say. Harlan, your mother sits with a red bird and forgives the form and the weather. We leave you where you are, not lost now. We know the place that held you. We will name it, even if the stone refuses to. Thunder argued with a ridge to the west. Aislinn picked up the whistle, tucked it back into the bag, and snapped the bag shut the way you close a letter you cannot ignore any longer. Her radio breathed and then found words. Fox Hollow Base to any unit on the east slope. Search secured. Weather has moved us. We will resume when it lets us. Families headed to shelter. If anyone finds a whistle, mark the spot. End of report, October 14, 1954. Aislinn lifted the handset to her mouth and did not speak. The silence she chose felt like respect, not fear. She held the radio until the voice faded into the music of rain. Then she climbed the hill back to the truck. The park wrote its own ending. Winter stripped the ridge to bones. Spring came with its first honest green. In May, a blowdown above Corbin Run sent a sycamore through the soil like a spoon and revealed a ledger of stones that had not seen light since Eisenhower. A student volunteer named Leda, working off a citation from a noisy night, found 2 marbles wedged into the roots where the ground had been a child's pocket. One was blue as the ridge on a clear day. One was green as a first leaf. They were bagged, labeled, cataloged. The ranger who filled out the form wrote found near the old stone spring house, Corbin Run, coordinates to follow. The park historian wrote a small note and signed it with a letter that looked like an A and a dot. Aislinn drove to Luray with the marbles and the whistle and a copy of the incident report with Martin Elwood's name on it. Tilda put her hand flat on the table again. She looked at the marbles and did not touch them. She touched the paper instead, the ink, the line that said, "Weather degenerating." She said Harlan's name until it stopped feeling like an apology. She picked up the whistle, finally, and put it to her ear as if listening to metal were a normal thing, and perhaps it is. Some evenings after that, if you drove Skyline Drive near mile marker 47 and rolled your window down, you could feel a warm breath slide into your car even when the air was sound and cool. It was not spooky, it was geology and a mistake and a memory. At the spring house, a ranger tied a ribbon to a low limb that matched the color of the marbles, bright enough to be seen and quiet enough to be ignored by anyone who did not need a reason to pause. The ribbon got replaced each year by whoever remembered. Martin Elwood's name found its way into the little museum at Big Meadows on a card next to an old lunch pail radio and a photo of the old Fox Hollow cinder pad with 4 ghostly post holes. Next to it, a thin slice of paper, a carbon copy of a letter whose original had been lost. The letter said, "Dear Mrs. Whitcomb, we are sorry we did not find your boy to bring him home. We did not stop looking until weather and hope told us to stop. He was last seen by the spring house that feeds Corbin Run. If you come to the park, a ranger will show you the stones." The letter was signed in a hand that did not know how to be neat and still be sincere. M. Elwood. Every now and then, on the radio, in the kind of weather that puts a lid on the hollows and makes the ridgelight a ghost, Aislinn would hear a wash of sound that reminded her of a man with a careful voice calling to his crew. She never keyed the mic until it faded. She let the air finish its sentence. She would step out of the truck and breathe the warm breath held in the cut. She would look toward the run that kept talking to the river under the leaves. She would say what she had learned to say when a story meets a place and refuses to end, just because the people in it have "thank you quietly" to the air. Then she would drive on, a little slower than before, as if a child were walking along the edge of her attention and she had decided to step back from the edge too. If you are listening from a place where the weather is steady, imagine a ridge crouched under a storm and a voice from a year you have to say out loud, not with numbers, but with breath. 1954. Hazel. Fox Hollow. A boy with a train's 3 notes in his mouth. A ranger with a lunch pail radio who pressed his fingers to his brow as if holding in his head all the ways a hill can keep a thing. Imagine the way a whistle feels in an old hand. Imagine the way a mother sits at a table and forgives a paper for being paper. Imagine the square of stones where water has no choice but to tell you where it is going. Then, tonight, when your own house makes its old noises and your clocks tame the hour into a number, let 1 minute expand for a voice that is not finished. Listen the whole time. Let the warm air pass across your face and do not name it. When it is done, say thank you and mean it. Then go to sleep. The hills will keep watch. The radios will behave until they do not, and even then, what they bring may be kinder than you fear. He followed the whistling into the cornfield. He told himself it was wind in the stalks, nothing more. But the sound had shape, and it carried a tune the way a bottle carries a ship. It rose up from the edge of the north field just before midnight, thin and certain, 3 notes first, then a run, then a pause, that felt like a person making room for breath. The night in Story County, Iowa, was the kind that makes a kitchen window into a mirror. He stood with one hand on the sill, the other around a chipped mug, and the whistling kept at it, unafraid to be heard. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? This was late September 2015. The day had been warm, sky rinsed clean after a brief storm, gravel roads drying into their usual rattle. The farm sat a mile and a half south of Nevada, east of the Skunk River, where it hooks like a lazy elbow. The corn had gone that heavy, dull gold that means the grain is ready and the husks are sick of holding on. In the house, the bedside clock down the hall said 11:52. On the porch, a moth bumped the bulb, reconsidered, bumped again. Merritt Dow listened and felt his scalp move, the way skin does when a memory gets up and looks at you. He had heard whistling most of his life, but not like this. His father had been a whistler when he repaired the sickle bar, when he checked the tension on the auger belts. His grandfather, too, walking the rows with a plug of tobacco and a tune older than the tractor. Merritt could place a tune by county if you gave him a night and a jar of iced tea. This one, though it didn't belong to any porch or station wagon, it had the small brightness of a fairground and the old soul of a hymn, mixed wrong on purpose and still somehow right. He set the mug down, pulled on his boots without bothering with the laces, and stepped into the porch light. The whistling came again, 3 notes that stepped down like someone walking off a train. He clicked off the switch. The yard went honest. The gravel drive was a gray river. The corn made its tinny rain sound whenever the breeze remembered its job. To the north, the trees along the fence line held their breath. Merritt had a habit of heading toward curiosity as if it were a calf out past the fence that needed fetching. He took the flashlight from the hook, the heavy kind with a rubber grip, and checked the batteries the way a person checks their pulse. He told himself this was neighbor trouble, or a kid from town testing bravery on a Friday dare. He told himself this was what the night does to grown men when sleep holds them by the elbow and then lets go. He told Dinah, the old collie, to stay. She licked once, turned in a tight circle on the porch rug, and stayed. He crossed the yard, past the big maple that had survived lightning by pretending it hadn't happened, and stepped onto the headland by the north field. The first row took him in like a store's door chime. The stalks were tall and dry, leaves bent into knives. The ground was soft from last week's rain and held his boot prints as if for reference. He waited for the whistling. It came from farther in now, or the rows had changed the way sound bends when it's forced to choose a path. He chose a path. He took row 18, the one that ran with the slight slope and the way water teaches roots to drink. His father had run the planter careful this spring, GPS straight when the signal behaved, by eye when it didn't. Row 18 should have held like a rail, the stalks pressed against his sleeves. The flashlight beam drew clean wood into the dark leaves, bleaching white, silk like old hair, dirt a puzzle of last year's husks, and this year's pennies of mud. The whistling stopped. He stood still. His breath sounded like someone else's in the mask of leaves. He tasted dust. He listened until listening felt like a rope he had to keep from dropping. Farther north, down toward the low spot by the drainage tile, it started again, only louder, as if the person had turned their head and decided the audience was worth the effort. Merritt moved. 3 rows over, the tram line cut across, a packed strip where the sprayer had gone in June. He took it. The corn arched overhead, leaves flicking his ears. Spiders had slung long theories between stalks. He broke them and apologized in his head. He had walked this ground every day for months, and the ground had said yes like a friend. Tonight, it felt like a cousin, a person who loves you without being sure what to do with you. He reached the low spot. The field dipped and turned its face toward the tile that ran down to the ditch. The air was cooler here, lined with the smell of black earth that keeps secrets for centuries, because that's what it was paid to do. The whistling had gone softer. A trill rose up like someone trying to make light of an apology. Merritt swept the flashlight sideways. The beam caught the blue reflection of something small and glassy. He crouched. A marble. Blue, with a pale ribbon curled inside, half under a leaf. He touched it with one finger and felt the way glass feels when it learned patience waiting inside a pocket for its chance. He stood, and the beam hit another, green this time, lodged at the foot of a stalk. He put them both in his shirt pocket without thinking which pocket meant past and which meant present. "Hello," he said. The field appreciated the effort, if the small answering hush meant anything. He wasn't the kind of man who called out names into a place that did not have names to call back. He was the kind of man who waited and then took one more step, the way you do with cattle that have decided the gate is optional. He took one more step. The ground had a memory. His boots sank an inch, then two. He pulled up. The mud let go with a sound like a low laugh. The beam found a scuff in the soil that wasn't his. It had rained the day before, a polite rain that brightened the world and left. Tracks should be fresh. This mark had a sharpness to it he didn't like. He aimed the light again. The scuff came to a point. Not deer, not raccoon. A toe of a boot slid sideways and corrected because the body above that boot had decided to remain upright. The field held that story and did not mind telling it. The whistling kept on. It moved east. Merritt moved too, allowing the rows to push him into the old waterway nobody planted because it cost more to argue with a ditch than to go around. He hit the bank and paused. The sound was close enough now to feel the mouth that made it, the slight wet at the end of notes, the breath through teeth. Above the ditch, on the fence line, a scarecrow leaned into the moon like he had been invited. Merritt had dressed him in a flannel shirt in July to keep the birds from laughing outright. Now the shirt's checks looked like an argument. The hat had blown off sometime in August. The stake had a twist in it the way wood does when it was alive and insists on a personality after. The scarecrow whistled. Merritt's body did not move in the way of cartoon men. He did not jump. He did not fling the light so hard the beam went to the stars. He stood, the way a person stands when what he sees insists on being nothing but what it is. He put the light on the scarecrow's painted mouth. The paint was flaked, the smile wrong on purpose. His father's old gloves were nailed to the crosspiece, fingers bent into permanent work. The straw at the neck had learned the shape of wind and refused to unlearn it. The tune came again from behind the scarecrow, clipped by fence wire and field. He played the beam along the fence. This line had been his grandfather's. His father had repaired it across 3 winters, one staple at a time, using a hammer that had bent 100 nails and 100 more. Tonight, a single strand lay loose between posts, a neat cut at shin height made by someone who liked clean work. Beyond the fence, the other place. Neighbors in the country are closer than people in town and farther away. The acreage to the east had belonged to the Kesslers once, then to the bank, then to a man who installed irrigation pivots with a speed that made the county whisper. Then it's Saturday. The pivot circle kept a gargoyle symmetry in the daylight and turned to bones at night. The whistling came from inside that circle, not far, an invitation or a dare. Merritt climbed the fence by habit and dropped into the tall, ragged grass beyond. His flashlight skipped over metal. The pivot tower rose where the corn had been cut early for silage. A ladder led up to a catwalk that had not been used since a summer of drought and cheap diesel. The sky put someone else's stars over everything. Under the ladder sat a cooler the color of a toy, lid askew, ice melted into a cold thought. 2 bottles lay on their sides. The labels had lost interest in staying on. He touched one. The glass was warm, warmer than the air deserved. He called out again, a different word this time. "Friend." The whistling answered with the same run of notes. He followed the sound around the base of the pivot. His light found Cobb's nod down to the spindle by raccoons with principle. He found a folding chair with only 3 of its 4 screws willing. He found a playing card gone into the dirt, face down forever. He did not find a person. The corn from the other side rustled, a polite cough. He turned. A taller shadow leaned out from where 2 rows had been pushed apart. The flashlight found denim, boots. The hem of a coat cut square. A hand. The skin had the tint of rural men, year-round, sun-washed, wind-scoured. The fingers were long and still. The hand did not wave. "Evening," Merritt said. He stepped closer. The shadow stepped back. The hand slid into the rose, as if hiding from a photograph. The whistling receded down an aisle of stalks, clean and straight as a hallway. He went after it. Later, he would say he never chose to follow, and he would not count that as a lie. The rose insisted. The sound invited. The night did what it always does when a person leaves a safe light and enters a place built to fit bodies only one at a time. It made a mouth and decided whether to swallow or to speak. The field spoke directions in leaves. He followed until the path tried to teach him regret, and his feet refused to be taught. At the heart of the pivot circle, the ground sank another foot. He stumbled once, caught himself against a stalk so dry it cut his palm in a clean straight line. He swore, quietly, with vowels only. The whistling had slowed. It drew out a single note and hung it in the air as if asking him to name it. He named it Unkind. He turned off the flashlight. Dark held him like water does when you slide under and open your eyes. The field went black, then not. The sky had its thin light, the stars arranged their patient omissions. The rows were no longer alleyways, exactly. They were sentences. A breeze moved through and added commas. He stepped forward into a word, then another. The whistling stopped. He waited. He could hear the pivot tower creak, a metal thought adjusting. A truck moved way off on County 18, 3 miles at least. Tires with thick voices, a man's radio too loud in the cab because the night drives its price down for everyone. He waited until the waiting was its own problem. He reached for the flashlight. The beam hit denim again. Close. A shoulder. He yanked the light up and met a face. It was not a face he knew from today. It might have been a face from a photograph under glass at the county fair, past names, eyes poured in. The hat was the wrong cut for now and the right cut for when hats were more than hats. The eyes adjusted to light with the slow patience of a barn cat in a doorway. The mouth held a shape that wasn't a smile and wasn't what comes later. The cheeks were hollowed in, the way working men's cheeks sag when they finally let the day have them. "Don't," the man said, not loud. He lifted one finger the way a teacher does when she'd rather not get stern. "Don't shine." Merritt lowered the beam to the man's chest. The denim had a tag that read, "Kessler in faded thread," as if a mother had stitched it when mud was the usual weather. The man nodded, brief. He put 2 fingers to his mouth and whistled the run again. The note slid under the leaves and came back altered by straw and distance. "Had to see if you'd come," the man said. He did not offer his name. He did not ask Merritt's. The field did the introductions it believed in. The man tipped his chin toward the north, where the ditch had cut a new curve 2 springs ago, and nobody called the county because sometimes you let water take responsibility for its own choices. "Come on, then." They went up Row, across the tram line, down again. Merritt kept the light aimed at boots and dirt the way you aim swear words when children are sleeping in the next room. The man's hands brushed the tassels as he went, leaving no sound. The field learned him and forgot Merritt in the same breath. They crossed into the neighbor's back 40, and the soil changed, darker and more confident. The rows had more to say here. The whistling would come and go like a small animal, checking the air and disliking it. The man stopped at a patch where the stalks had been storm-bent and then righted themselves out of pride. He crouched, hand out, palm down, on top of a flat stone that had no business on this ground. The stone was square. It held an iron ring in one corner. He tapped it. The sound returned like a jar lid. "Used to be a storm door," he said. "For the root cellar. They built the house up there." He flicked his eyes toward where the stars thinned and the silhouette of a ruined chimney picked its teeth on the horizon. "Tornado took it in '54, you know that." Merritt nodded. He had heard the story. The county leaned on that year. It changed the way people believe in roofs. 3 days after, the man said, setting his palm to the stone like a pledge, "My brother thought he heard whistling here. We believed him because he was the kind of boy who told the truth, even when it meant he had to walk back and fix something. He followed it. Everybody followed it. Men with boots and women with cakes and ropes and tubs and a feeling of the back of their necks being breathed on. We pulled the stone up, we brought lanterns. It goes under like a snake down there. The cellar does. We didn't find anyone. No boy, no breath, just apples rolling because that's what they do when people die. Things keep their job anyway. We closed it back up. Weather put a shoulder on it. And now, he stopped. The whistling came, this time from under their feet. It rose up through the stone like a trick, thin and mean and a little proud, a tune that went square, then wandered off the edge. The iron ring shook against its socket with a burr. Merritt felt the hair along his forearms ask for a vote. Now, the man said, it calls people here when it's time. He put his hand on the ring. I'm tired of it calling people here who are not me. He lifted. It did not rise much. The hinge had rusted itself into religion. The man looked at Merritt, not pleading, exactly, not persuading. He looked like a person offering you the end of a sentence the world has been running too long. Merritt set the flashlight down on its base and got his fingers under the corner. The stone was heavy-hearted, more weight than mass, the kind of weight that comes from being asked to hold back a story. They lifted together. It rose an inch, then two. It settled on a ridge of broken brick. The smell answered before the dark did. Apples, old and bitter, work that had gone on without supervision. Cold earth that had kept promises by crushing them. A draft moved across Merritt's knuckles. It took his body down a list to be sure each part remembered what stand means. The whistling ran up inside the gap and out. It had volume now. It wished it had a throat. It would have stopped if someone had blessed the night right then and said, go on to sleep. No one blessed the night. Merritt and the man held the stone a second longer, then eased it down onto a stick propped like a tired knee. The gap held. The dark inside threw itself at their eyes and bounced back, patient. They did not aim the flashlight in, the man would not have it, and Merritt knew enough to trust someone who belonged to a place this much. They listened instead. The whistling ran its tune twice, then twice again, and each time the final note sagged, as if asking someone to let it lie. Why me? Merritt asked. He wasn't offended by the question. He wanted a reason that could wear a hat. You were the one who heard it honest, the man said. You stayed at the edge of your field as long as you could and still came. Some men run because they want a story to tell about themselves. You came because you wanted to know who to go fetch. Merritt shoved down the part of himself that softened at that. He bent, slid his hand into the gap until his fingertips touched the dirt at the lip. It was cool, the way a basement never loses January. He searched by hand, careful for glass, nothing but pebbles and the slow grind of last century's lessons. The whistling faltered. It shortened itself and became 3 notes, those 3 notes he had heard at the kitchen window, the 3 his father had bent into the radio between ballgame innings, the 3 his grandfather had used to call a dog that never needed calling. He withdrew his hand and stood. The man had his head down, listening as if his bones were the receiving equipment. He began to hum, not the tune, but a harmony low and uninsistent. The whistling slowed. The cellar air came up wetter than before, fouled for a second by something like breath, and then clean. The whistling stopped. They waited a full minute, then another. Merritt counted, slow, as if a child in a tent had asked him to promise monsters were on vacation. The ground under the stone was a fact again. The man let his harmony stop, the notes settling like a bird on a line, and then choosing not to stay. He knelt and pulled the stick, and the stone met its ledge with a sound like a chest closing. Sometimes, the man said into the calm, it wanted an argument. Sometimes it wanted somebody from back then to say his name and make a promise. It wanted a mother crying on the dirt. It wanted men with rope because rope makes everyone feel helpful. Not tonight. Tonight you came and you didn't carry any of that. You just listened harder than the field wants you to. That's enough. They stood together in the rows until the night got bored with them and went to do what the night does in other places. The pivot sighed and remembered it had bearings, not opinions. The ditch water moved on its way, not fast, not slow, never wrong. A coyote put a sentence into the air and another answered, and both sentences agreed to end where they did. The man tipped the brim of a hat he wasn't wearing and turned back into the corn. His boots made no more sound than a thought that knows its limit. Merritt found his way to his own side of the fence. The cut strand had not healed. Fences need hands. He climbed and dropped into dirt he had paid for with 3.5 decades of rain and frugal Sundays. The scarecrow leaned the same way. His flashlight picked out a nail that had worked proud where a glove met wood. He tapped it back in with the handle, the small sound a hope. On the porch, Dinah lifted her head and thumped her tail twice. He sat on the steps and watched the sky unspool its last thin silk. The clock over the stove in the kitchen read 1:42. A local freight passed through town without asking anyone's opinion. The night had its usual old chair smell. Merritt took the marbles from his pocket and rolled them in his palm. He did not take them in the house. He set them on the porch rail, two small moons that decided to belong to weather again. He slept in the chair by the door with the light over the sink left on because he was still old enough to do what his father had done and still young enough to want a reason for it. In the morning, his neighbor from across County 18 pulled into the drive with the casual angle of men who do not use turn signals because everybody already knows where they're going. Otho Vale had the kind of face that had learned to tolerate sunlight and other people's plans. He stepped out, looked toward the north field, then at the porch where the marbles caught the first slant. He paused. "Thought I heard it last night," Otho said, as if they'd been in the same dream and had already agreed on the parts to keep. "I didn't come. I was afraid if I went, I'd bring the wrong thing with me. You go." "I went," Merritt said. He poured coffee into a cup that had chipped the day his daughter drove away, with her car full and her eyes wider than they had any right to be. He handed the cup down. "There's a stone out there. You know it." Otho nodded. "Been there longer than you and me combined. Some things are a door, and some things are the breath you take before you knock." They sat without sitting, Otho leaning on the post, Merritt half on, half off the iron chair that had belonged to his wife's aunt, and squeaked like the first word of gossip. The morning took the night apart and put it away neatly. The field did what fields do after an event. It pretended nothing had happened and invited you to harvest. By 10, the co-op truck rumbled up, the driver wearing the resigned cheer of a man who deals in averages for a living. Merritt walked the headland with him, pointed at moisture readings that lied slightly, agreed to pretend the numbers were written on a blackboard by someone with authority. He did the work. He did it until the work forgave him for wondering what else he might be supposed to do. That evening, he repaired the fence where the strand had been cut. He pulled it tight and stapled it with his grandfather's hammer because you use the tools that know your hands. He hammered in 3 staples and left one in his pocket so the fence would remember there is always one more job and it can't get cocky. He checked the pivot base out of courtesy to the machine. He replaced nothing. He spoke to no one. The sky went red behind weather stacked to the west, Kansas doing its job of sending clouds as if on purpose. For a week, the field behaved. The wind laid down its sheet music neatly. The coupe truck counted out grain like blessings. He slept at the proper times and did not wake to odd hours with the feeling of someone whistling at the edge of his life. The marbles stayed on the porch rail until a grackle knocked one off and it rolled into the peony bed and took up residence there like a kindness. The other slid into the pocket of his jacket and made friends with a nickel and a screw. On the 9th night, just after the 10 o'clock news told its last hurries, he heard the 3 notes again quiet, like acknowledgement, not summons. He walked out to the north edge and stood with his hands in his jacket, listening. The breeze had a bite, the first hard frost would be soon. He unlocked the gate at the lane and left it open for an hour, for no reason at all anyone else would endorse. He closed it again out of habit and walked back slowly, because a person should walk slowly sometimes or the land will feel cheap. He did not go back to the stone unless the sound asked, and it did not. He did, however, leave a small jar on the porch rail next to where the marbles had Saturday. It held nails, the good kind, old, with heads like pennies. Every day when he came home, he put one in his pocket, and every day when he went out after supper, he took one back to the fence line and put it in a coffee can under the scarecrow's torn shirt. Nobody told him to. He liked the weight exchange. He liked that fences need reminding and that the world is not improved by a man who ignores a slack line because his thoughts are more interesting. October reached both hands across the month and pulled. The trucks came and went. The harvest went well enough that he stopped thinking about what could have been If it had rained 4 more afternoons in August, he slept, he woke. The whistling did not return in any way that made him leave his chair. He began to tell himself he had imagined a portion of it, as a man will do when a thing does not ask for money or apologies. Near Halloween, his daughter called from Cedar Rapids, a night shift at the hospital, voice folded with fatigue and the kind of joy that remembers to leave room for the day. He told her about the fence and the harvest and the brakes squeal on the auger wagon that he had decided to live with until January. He did not tell her about the cellar. He would, maybe, when she brought the little boy down for Thanksgiving and they stood by the ditch and talked about frogs like a miracle. He would, maybe, if the field asked them both. In late November, after the last corn went into the bin and the bin talked in its sleep, the county put on its winter color. The field showed ribs, the ditch showed its honest bottom. The wind took one of the scarecrow's gloves, and Merritt did not replace it because some things are beautiful at half done. He walked every line of his ground one afternoon with the sun low and the temperature willing. At the fence, by the pivot circle, under the coffee can where he had been giving the fence its nails, he found a small thing. A train ticket for a child, maybe, not used. Edges scrolled by, damp and patience. The print read, Nevada to Ames, 2 bits. He turned it over. On the back, someone had written 3 notes the way some people know and others never will, little ovals marching up and down a ladder of lines. The ink had migrated slightly into the paper, the way memories do in older heads. He put the ticket in his pocket with the nickel and the screw in the marble that had refused the peony bed. He looked toward the stone without moving his face much, because a person does not want to give a field reason to brag. He said thank you into his jacket as if the cloth were a helper. He walked home. Winter did what it does. It scoured the county down to the essentials. It made the roads into suggestions and the kitchen into a chapel. It put the sound of the furnace into his bones and the number of snow shovels in the garage into a bigger argument than necessary. The whistling came once or twice in a blow that turned the mailbox into a hooded thing, and when it did, he stood at the window and let it be. The way you let a neighbor sing one verse of a song you only half like because he is your neighbor, and you hope the reverse is also true. When spring returned, hesitant and then reckless, he walked out to the stone once in daylight. He stood there like a person does when he's about to open a letter he has already read. He put his hand on the iron ring, and the ring chose not to move. He felt only cool metal and the idea of a door. He said the name of the boy he thought must have once practiced whistling there, not loud, not soft. He thanked the man with the Kessler tag for nothing and for everything. He went home and planted, because that is the part of the story a farm writes to remind itself the ending belongs to the ground and the beginning belongs to the same. If you ever hear 3 notes carry clean from a field at midnight, and you are the kind of person who can tell the difference between wind and a message, remember this. The first step into the rose is a promise. Don't make it if you intend to perform yourself for the dark. Bring only your boots, your breath, and your willingness to be the person who will go fetch, not the person who will tell about fetching. Don't shine your light straight into old places unless someone who belongs to them asks you to. Lay your hand flat on what needs closing. When a tune that has wandered too long finds its last note, let it. When a door that has been heavy learns again how to rest, do not hire that door for different work. There are states where cornfields wear their ghosts like belts. There are ditches whose water knows the names people set into it. There are stones that have been held down by weather and held up by stories. There are men who can whistle and men who cannot, and both kinds do well if they listen. And sometimes, in a county that owes as much to wind as to family, a man with a flashlight and an old dog asleep on the porch will follow a tune into the rose and come back, having left something that doesn't need his hands anymore. When he sits down again, the chair will squeak in the key the field prefers. The kitchen clock will softly argue with the refrigerator about seconds. The night will soften him on its slow wheel. The next day, someone will wave on County 18 without lifting a hand, and the answer will come back exactly right. And somewhere beyond the line where 2 quarters meet under a fence, a stone will find it easier to be a stone because 2 men lifted it once, together, and then set it down the way the land asked. The dorm room that kept getting warmer every night. The first night she noticed it, The heat felt like a mistake rather than a message. Early September in Ohio, a Sunday that leaned into Monday, the kind of campus night when cicadas buzz like old streetlights and the dorm's brick walls hold the afternoon sun just long enough to be nostalgic. Isolde Marin unrolled a thrifted rug that smelled faintly of cedar, set two plants on the windowsill like green punctuation, and lay back on the narrow bed under the hum of a fan that tried hard and failed. Sutter Hall, room 412, fourth floor, end of the hall. The radiator beneath the window ticked its polite little ticks. Her phone read 78 inside, while the weather app swore 68 outside. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? The year was 2018. Move-in had been a week of book stacks, cardboard cuts, and names learned in bursts that evaporated by dinner. Isolde's major was urban studies with a minor in printmaking because maps and ink made sense even when people did not. Her roommate, a sophomore transfer named Mairead Klein, arrived with a battered cello case and the posture of someone who had done 3 summers of lifeguarding and was still listening for whistles. Their RA, Bram Delaney, wore a lanyard like a badge and kindness like a habit. The floor smelled like laundry pods and slice and bake cookies. The building smelled like every Midwestern dorm built in the 1970s, a blend of cinder block, old varnish, and the ghost of burnt popcorn. That first night, Isolde pushed the window up 2 inches. The sash stuck, then relented with a groan that sounded like the word careful. She fell asleep to a parking lot lullaby and woke at 2:19 with her neck damp. The fan had not changed. The room had. The little thermometer clipped to her backpack strap said 81. She turned the fan higher. The blades shouted their small capacity. She kicked the blanket down and slept again like a person auditioning for rest. Monday, the heat drifted earlier, 10:47. A wave across her ankles first, then knees, then a slow embrace that felt like a crowded bus in July. She checked the radiator. Cold metal. She put her palm on the cinder block, on the window glass, on the closet door. Nothing from those shapes admitted guilt. Mairead returned from orchestra and set the cello gently on the desk chair. She stood still, chin tilted, the way musicians listen to rooms. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "It keeps getting warmer after midnight," Isolde said. "The building probably overcorrects, day cools down, system lags, night gets weird." Mairead nodded. "I fell asleep during rehearsal last winter in a practice room. Woke drenched. Found out the steam had backfed into a silent radiator. You could hear it in the walls if you pressed your ear." They both pressed their ears to the dorm wall. The cinder block offered a polite shush, the way libraries used to. No steam, no hiss, just the slow drum of a building's heart. By Wednesday, the room was a decision the night kept making. 83 by 1 a.m., 85 by 3. Isolde checked the hallway, cool enough to be a relief. She checked the stairwell, cooler still. In the common room, a girl wearing a sweatshirt that said "Ecology means everything" had her feet tucked under her and a textbook open like a tent. She looked up. "Your floor hot too." "Only ours," Isolde said. "Or only me. Or only when I try to sleep." They laughed because college teaches you to treat weirdness like weather. You comment, you adapt, you set one more fan on the windowsill and call it a life. Thursday brought a storm that argued with the city for hours. A late summer brawl of heat and lightning. The power hiccuped and then recovered. The building hummed. At 2 a.m., the room hung heavy. Isolde slid out of bed, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead to the screen, as if the night owed her an apology. Far below, a maintenance cart whispered along the service road. She saw the driver's hat and his careful hands. She did not see the face. She told herself the heat felt personal only because you cannot argue with a building and win. By Saturday, the temperature games had found a schedule. 9:58, a nudge. 11:30, a hand on the small of the back. 1:12, the sensation of standing too close to an open oven. Isolde began to time her showers like a boxer timing breath. She tried sleeping on the cool tile of the little bathroom. She tried damp cloths on wrists and ankles. She tried a sliver of ice in a hand towel held to her throat. She tried pretending it was fine. She told no one at home because her mother would only worry and send articles about heat stroke, and her father would suggest a hardware store trip that distance made irrelevant. Sunday night, Mairead woke first. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, said a word that sounded like, "What is this?" and went to the window. The sash had dropped the last inch by itself at some point in the night, closing with that old house suction that makes a soft kiss. She lifted it again, hot air breathed in, not outdoor hot. Not the honest humidity of a Midwest night, different, like the air that escapes when you open a dryer in a laundromat and forget to step back. "We call maintenance in the morning," Mairead said. "We tell them we have an invisible sauna. We use likable voices and the phrase safety concern." Monday morning, Bram came with a clipboard and his likable voice. He listened earnestly, took the temperature with a cheap tool that blinked numbers nobody trusted, wrote down 86, and then underlined it as if underlining were a wrench. He called facilities. They promised someone by afternoon. The someone arrived at 4:19, late enough to be human, early enough to look like hope. His name, patch read, Gentry. He was the kind of person who stands in a room like it has a puzzle only he can solve and then smiles when the puzzle turns out to be harder. He checked the radiator, the thermostat no one had noticed in the corner with its tiny slider, the vent slits high near the ceiling that made the room look like it could breathe if it wanted to. "Steam off," he said. "Air handler off. You got a ghost heater." He grinned to make sure they understood he meant the phrase and not the ghost. But he knocked on the radiator anyway, knuckles to iron, the way some people knock on wood when they do not believe in luck and practice it just in case. He opened the closet and frowned. "Do you mind?" he asked, and shifted their shoes to one side. Behind the shoe rack, a square of plywood patched a hole in the wall. Screws, paint over paint. He crouched, fit a screwdriver into a head, and worked it loose. When the panel came away, a breath of air came with it. Warm, the kind of warm air that has been waiting its turn. "Old Chase," he said. "Big one. They used to run steam risers along these shafts in the 70s. Maybe a repair, maybe somebody capped something and forgot to ask the night to forgive them." He put his hand into the dark space and paused. He was not afraid. He was listening. Hear that. They leaned closer. At first, only quiet, then a small sound. Not a hiss, not a vapor whisper. A tick. Regular, patient. Like a metronome a long room away. Gentry nodded. "Thermal something. Or a tenant below you added a pet space heater that thinks it owns the building. I'll trace the chase. I'll talk to the engineers." He put the panel back gently and made a note on his worksheet with a pencil that had been sharpened to the earnest point of a person who still respects graphite. "I will try to fix the physics. In the meantime, get a bigger fan." He winked to soften the fact that bigger fans often just make bigger noise. They bought another fan anyway. They bought clips to hold the window higher. They bought ice in the deli and wrapped it in a towel like a patient. Still, Knight insisted. Isolde began keeping a notebook. It was a habit from a summer job shelving returns. Titles, times, temperatures. Notes that sounded like weather reports written by a poet with a bad sense of humor. The dorm ate the cool at 1:18. The bed felt like a cast iron pan that had forgotten it was retired. I dreamed of a field on fire with no flame. She started staying up with the heat to see if it would reveal its reason. She did readings in the hall where the air felt borderline normal. She ate popsicles and pretended it was study fuel. She took walks at 2 and saw the campus under its other mask. A place of slow bikes and glowing vending machines, and a custodian humming while polishing a floor into a lake. Once she saw Gentry in the stairwell, descending from 5 with a coil of flexible duct over his shoulder like a silver python that had agreed to be helpful. He nodded and lifted one hand without letting the duct slip. "Sleep," he said in the tone of a wish. By the 3rd week, a rumor floated into their floor group chat. Sutter Hall used to be a summer dorm for high school programs and band camps. The heat was leftover rehearsal energy. Someone else wrote that an electrical fire in 1979 had bruised the 4th floor and the building was still shy about it. A person named Quillen in 409 posted a link to an archive student newspaper with a grainy photo of firefighters carrying a hose through a stairwell that looked exactly like theirs. Headline: "Minor fire, major evacuation, no injuries, cause unknown." Mairead, who believed in research the way some people believe in saint candles, went to the library's basement where old newsprint lives. She returned with photocopies that smelled faintly of toner and dust. The story was sparse. Smoke at 3:03, alarms, students in bathrobes on the lawn, the heat source somewhere inside a wall where a maintenance chase ran, repairs by October, reopening with new paint and the same old radiators. She spread the pages on the desk like cards. There, she said softly, pointing to a little box at the margin. Letter to the editor. Student writes that the heat on 4 was getting worse each night before the fire. RA told them to open windows and hydrate. Facilities said everything within normal range. The days were normal. The nights turned the rooms into ovens. Isolde looked from the paper to the cinder block. Sometimes a run of text looks like a hallway and you want to walk down it with a flashlight. She hit the building's history page on the university site. Donors. Dedications. A black and white photo of a ribbon. Nothing about the night warmth that arrived like someone else's breath. At 1:27, the room grew heavy again. As if their research had rung a bell the building had been waiting to hear. The fan jammed the window open, but the heat came anyway. The little thermometer blinked 88 and then surrendered to the idea that numbers, like sleep, sometimes lose track of themselves. Isolde slept badly and woke with a headache that tasted like pennies. On her desk, the notebook sat open to an entry she did not remember writing. The letters were tidy, her handwriting when she tried to look like someone else. She read the line twice, then 3 times. It said, "Open the panel," and the period at the end looked like a door. She waited until afternoon. Gentry had promised to come back sometime, and sometime often arrives when a person steps away for 5 minutes. At 4 o'clock, with the building's light turned down to that late summer amber, she moved the shoe rack again and unscrewed the panel. The dark behind it was not night, exactly. More like the idea of a hallway after the last person has left and turned the lights off out of habit. She lifted her phone flashlight and aimed it into the chase. Dust motes performed private theater. A vertical shaft, maybe 2 feet across, ran up and down like a secret elevator. Patches where pipes had once been. Scars where brackets had caught things. And there, almost directly under the bottom edge of the opening, a flat ledge of old wood with something resting on it. Isolde reached in with care, as if the dark could be brittle. Her fingers found the object's corner. Cardboard. The top felt soft, the way paper does when it has been damp and then forced to pretend it never was. She drew it out. A small box that had once been white and now had become a kind of museum beige. On the lid, written in a hand that pressed too light, a word like a name, Juniper. She set the box on the rug and did not open it. She waited, and the waiting gave her permission to continue. Inside, a stack of index cards tied with string, a folded note, a key on a blue ribbon, narrow as a promise. The note began with, "Dear whoever found this," and continued with the kind of sentences people write when they have been waiting to tell something to a person who will understand. The year at the top of the page read 1979. The signature at the bottom read, "Juniper Vale, Room 4, 16, Sutter Hall." The handwriting leaned to the right, steady as a person who prefers walking to running. "I do not know if I will be believed," it said. "So I am writing this as plainly as I can. Our room is getting warmer each night. The thermometer in our snake plant reads 87 at 3 in the morning. Nobody believes a snake plant. My roommate thinks I am being dramatic. I asked the RA. He said it is just late summer in Ohio. It is not. The heat comes after midnight. It leaves at dawn. The radiator is cold. The vent does not blow. The closet smells like hot iron. I hear ticking in the wall. We are on 4. If you are reading this, maybe you have it too." Isolde felt her own breath echo back from the paragraph. She looked up at the closet door, then at the open chase, as if the words might have leaked. Juniper's note went on, "I work at the cafeteria breakfast shift. I am awake when others are asleep. The heat is a person to me now. It arrives at a time, it stays, it goes. I tried to leave the window open and the sash slid down. I propped it with a book, the book fell, then the window closed by itself. I am not saying a ghost. I am saying something else has a habit here. In case this is useful to you, I am also leaving these." Inside the library's bound journals, Someone wrote about a fire on this floor long ago, and then someone else took the page out. I copied what I could before they did. The key is to a storage cabinet in the basement of this building. There are boxes there the staff say are theirs. The key works for the green cabinet that has a dent like a fist. I did not take anything because I got scared. Maybe you will not be. If no one else believes you, I do. I believe you enough to hide this where the building keeps its secrets. If I am wrong, throw this away. If I am right, find what the staff do not talk about. Do not forget to sleep. That is where your spine remembers its job. Mairead came in from rehearsal and stopped when she saw the open panel, the box, the pages laid like a small altar. She sank to the floor and read with both hands pressed flat against the rug as if to steady the words. "We have to find the cabinet," she said, voice quiet like church. "We have to ask Bram to not ask questions." Bram did ask questions because that is also the RA's job. When he saw the note and the box and the panel, he bent his head. He was not a superstitious person, only a person who had worked 3 summers as a camp counselor and learned that buildings hold mood the way lakes hold wind. "I can get you into the basement," he said. "I will walk away from the door and hum loudly so that if anyone asks me what I was doing, I can say I was humming. You will be fast." The basement under Sutter was everything a basement should be. Cool as forgiveness, damp as a memory kept by concrete. The hall shone a soft yellow that made everything look like a faded photograph. Green cabinets lined one wall. The third from the end had a dent like a fist. The key ribbon was blue. The lock turned. Inside, cardboard boxes labeled with dates and short phrases. Stack of work orders, Steam archive, fire log, staff do not remove. The handwriting on the labels was neat and stern. Mairead reached up and slid one down. The bottom sagged ominously. They set it on the floor. Inside, manila folders swollen with damp and years. Isolde opened one and pulled a sheet carefully so it would not split. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 416. Unusual heat after midnight. Radiator cold. Closet warm. Check chase, check riser. She set it aside and pulled another. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 412. Student reports late heat, not present daytime. Housekeeping notes window sash malfunctioning. Recommend maintenance weld stop. Isolde looked up. Weld stop. She imagined a person 40 years earlier thinking a sliding sash a nuisance and telling someone to make it tame. Another folder. Fire log, September. Smell of hot iron. Call at 3-3. Response within 3 minutes. Source uncertain. Damage limited to inside of chase between 412 and 416. Cause undetermined. Recommendation: cap steam riser permanently at basement and roof. Service ticket created. The paper clipped to the recommendation was a receipt for parts and a penciled note reading, "Done." A second note added another sentence in a different hand. Night crew reports residual heat persists. Monitor. Mairead pressed her palm over her own heart. This is the story of every building that tries to forget. The parts get fixed, the habit stays. They took photos with their phones like archivists on a deadline. They replaced the folders in the box with the care of people dressing a child who was finally asleep. They locked the cabinet. Bram hummed. The hallway air kept its cool. Back upstairs, they sat with the panel open and the note on the rug, and the cooling afternoon creeping through the window like a kind visitor. Isolde's notebook waited with its white page. She wrote, "Juniper, thank you." She did not know where to put the sentence, so she put it on the first line under the date so it would be the thing the day had to carry. At 1:28, the heat returned. It did not surge. It arrived politely, like a person who has been taught to knock. Isolde sat on the floor beside the open chase and placed her hand just inside without touching any side. The air felt warmer than the room, as if the chase were a throat exhaling a breath it had saved. "What do you want?" she said aloud, not because she thought the building would answer, but because sometimes the voice knows which door truth stands behind. The tick came again, regular, small. Isolde counted between ticks. 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. The rhythm made a shape in her mind, not a clock, a valve. A thing that opens, and then holds. A thing that believes in intervals. She looked at the radiator, at the elbow joint where the old pipe met the shutoff wheel. A tiny telltale stain had crept along the seam, brown and precise. She leaned closer. Warm, not hot. Warm like a wrist. Gentry returned the next day with a partner whose name patch read Tova. They listened, as technicians do when the room is allowed to make its case. Isolde showed them the cabinet photos. Tova's lips kept a straight line while her eyebrows confessed their feelings. They pulled the panel and shone better light. They found the old riser, capped, cool. They found a newer run of conduit laid up the side at some later date, carrying wires, not heat. They found insulation collapsed onto itself like old cake. They found nothing that pointed to a flame or a hiss. Tova ran a thermal camera along the cinder block. The screen glowed in false color. A vertical stripe warmer than its neighbors lay behind the closet and the head of the bed. Not red, not danger, yellow shading into orange. Residual, Gentry said, could be heat migrating from a lower source, could be a hot water loop bringing showers to the floor below with more enthusiasm than planned. But the loop below doesn't run at 3 in the morning, Tova said. She had the nap schedule of the building memorized. She pointed to the thermal stripe. This is a habit. They scheduled a shutdown for the following night, midnight to 4. The building would sigh and then sleep while they opened valves and listened for the kind of silence that tells the truth. Bram knocked on doors and posted signs. The girls in Ecology Means Everything, Sweats, groaned about showers and then agreed. The fourth floor exhaled in a collective okay. At 12:12, the pump slowed. The fan in 412 made its small, brave wind. The window held at 3 inches with 2 clips like a pair of loyal hands. At 1:27, the room still warmed. Not as high, not as fast, but enough to say, I am here. Isolde sat on the rug and pressed her shoulder to the closet wall. She closed her eyes so hearing could be her only job. She heard the tick, she heard Myreed's breath even. She heard, outside, a late skateboard roll between classes like a drum. And she heard, very faint and not from the chase at all, a tone. Not a pipe, not a fan, not foreseeable. A note, caught and held. Then gone. She opened her eyes. Myreed was looking at her with a musician's gaze. You heard it too. What is it? Isolde asked. A harmonic. The kind you get when a sympathetic thing vibrates because its friend is nearby. She touched the cello case. Instruments do it, rooms do it, bodies do it when they are convinced. She stood, walked to the bookshelf, lifted a glass of water, and set it on the radiator. The surface quivered. A ripple. A second one. The pattern of the tick. Myreed tuned by memory and sang a single, low pitch, almost under her breath. A hum that could have been mistaken for a thought. The glass shivered. The tick in the wall danced out of step, then found her beat, then stilled as if listening, then returned. What if, she said quietly, all this is sound pretending to be heat? Isolde did not laugh. She had learned the month prior that grief can pretend to be a quiz grade and hunger can pretend to be impatience. Why not sound pretending to be heat? She ran her palm along the cinder block, then placed it flat and left it. A warmth answered. The next day was October 1st. Campus wore flannel and pretended it had always loved cinnamon. Facilities sent an email with the subject line Steam Update that promised further investigation and patience. The fourth floor shared a thread of remedies and rituals. Bowls of ice, mist bottles, wet socks trick, floor naps. No one suggested sage. Someone suggested prayer with a grin that did not deny its usefulness. That night, the heat arrived like a smaller animal. 81, 82, a steady hold at 83. Manageable if you learned how. Isolde placed the glass on the radiator again, turned off the fans, and waited for quiet to settle where it belongs. Myreed sang once, twice, and stopped. The glass's ripples slowed. The tick shifted to the far side of the closet. A draft found her ankles like a cat checking for attention. The room listened back. They made it through October with methods that would have looked ridiculous out of context and were ordinary inside it. They slept with wet towels folded like scarves. They studied in the hall and accepted that their room had been reclassified as a place you prepared to enter rather than a place you lived. They kept the panel off. They learned to say thank you to cool mornings and to say aloud the promise to return before night put its hand on the doorknob. One evening, after a storm blew leaves against the window like letters trying to enter, Bram knocked and leaned in. Facilities found something, he said. You want to come see? The invitation sounded like a friend offering to show you where a magic trick hides its thread. In the basement, Tova stood beside the building's old heart, piping like veins, valves like knuckles, tags tied with string, naming parts from an era that believed names mattered. She pointed to a run that disappeared into the wall beneath, where 412 would stand above them. Here, a capped branch, not steam, an old electrical conduit bypassed years ago. It sits next to a hot water loop. When the loop runs heavy during evening showers, it warms the conduit and then the chase. The chase carries that warmth upward. At night, when the loop cycles to keep the building from feeling abandoned, the warmth lingers. The panel in your closet became the mouth of it. A small chimney with no smoke. Gentry tapped the conduit with his knuckle. You could call it physics, you could also call it habit. Either is the right answer. They installed insulation around the conduit. They added an air brake in the chase so warmth would stop treating the wall like a ladder. They replaced the window's stiff cords so the sash would consent to stay where a human asked it to stay. They promised it would help. They did not promise everything. It helped. The nights cooled to numbers that looked like decimals instead of pronouncements. 77. 76 when the wind took an interest. Isolde slept without wet towels. She still woke at 1:27 once, for no reason except the body's loyalty to former alarms. She lay there and listened. The room made its old house noises. Outside, snow rehearsed far away and then gave up. She fell asleep, mouthing the word juniper the way a person mouths the name of a bus stop, to remember where to get off next time. November brought a letter. Real paper, wiggle of ink, the return address, for a dorm across campus, Reed Hall. Inside, 2 sentences in a tidy hand. I found your note in the basement box when Bram fetched more tape for door decorations. My aunt's name was Juniper Vale. She lived in Sutter in 1979. I have a photo of her in front of a radiator holding a cup of tea and laughing like the tea was a joke. Thank you for believing her. Signed, Quillen Vale, room 305. Isolde wrote back. She wrote about the cabinet and the boxes and the way the building had tried to forget. Quillen wrote again with a copy of the photo. Juniper looked like someone who would hide a note and trust the future. Hair gathered in a bandana, eyes practicing mischief. The radiator behind her, upright as a soldier that had decided to sit. Finals arrived like weather that had been announced for weeks and still surprised everyone. Mairead spent long hours in the practice rooms, bow rising and falling like a small boat riding out a swell. Isolde finished a printmaking project of 14 little maps of Sutter Hall. She gave the stairwells names. She drew the 4th floor twice, once by day, once by night. She printed in blue and rust. She added a tiny red dot where their closet panel sat like a secret door. She titled the piece, Heat Rises, Then Cool Heads. On the last night before winter break, they propped the door open and played a playlist of songs that sounded like leaving without saying goodbye. Their neighbors drifted in. Cups of cocoa. A plate of cookies that looked store-bought and tasted like grief in the shape of sugar. Someone told a story about a chessboard left in a laundry room that always had one piece moved between midnight and dawn. Someone else told a story about a campus fountain that ran warm all winter like a stubborn rumor. They laughed easily because relief had come. Before midnight, Bram stood in the doorway with his clipboard and a tired smile and said, "Thank you for not setting anything on fire this semester.